Welcome back. Today we're looking at an investigative news script, and it's some pretty heavy material. We're talking alleged documents from the Jeffrey Epstein files that seem to link former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak with Qatari officials.
All about security for the World Cup. It's a tangled web.
It is, so let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dig in.
The first thing that really jumps out at me is the structural foundation of the whole story.
Okay.
The script leans incredibly hard on the Epstein hook to get the listener in the door. It promises this connection.
Right.
But when you actually look for the logical bridge between the Epstein files and the, direct emails between Barak and the Qataris, that bridge feels a bit wobbly.
It needs to be more explicit.
It needs to be much more explicitly constructed to satisfy, frankly, a skeptical audience.
I see that gap, I do. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. The script opens with a very definitive claim, doesn't it?
It does.
It says the connection happened under the mediation of Epstein. It states pretty clearly that the reason we're seeing these emails is because of Epstein. So isn't that enough? Does the reporter really need to hold the audience's hand through the whole file directory?
In a story of this magnitude, I think so. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, think about the listener profile here. You have people who are just inherently skeptical of Epstein connections because they've become such a catch-all headline.
A bit of fatigue there.
A lot of fatigue. The script makes the claim, but then it immediately jumps to quoting direct correspondence between Barak and Jabur al-Thani.
We go from Epstein made this happen to here's Barak talking to Qatar.
We miss the introduction.
We missed the actual introduction.
So it's a chain of custody issue.
That's it. It is. We see the destination, the emails, but we miss the handoff. The listener has to take the reporter's word that Epstein was the bridge.
Right. If I'm a skeptic or even just, a rigorous fact checker, I'm sitting there waiting for the smoking gun that actually puts Epstein in the room, so to speak.
Where's the email from Epstein saying, meet Ehud?
Exactly. Where is that document?
That's a fair point. Without showing that specific handoff, the narrative relies on inference, not demonstration. It's the difference between saying, I found this in his house, and I found this in his hand.
Good way to put it.
But what if that specific meet Ehud email? What if it doesn't exist? Or what if the reporter has it, but it's just, boring legalese?
Then you have to get creative with how you present the evidence you do have. You can't just skip it.
Okay.
The suggestion here is to insert a specific beat in the script before we get to all the juicy Barak Qatar stuff that describes where these files came from.
You're talking about setting the scene digitally.
Right, so let's think of a concrete way to do this. Before the narrator reads that Happy New Year email to Jabor, they need to describe the file structure. You could say something like, buried within a subfolder explicitly labeled Qatar on Epstein's personal server, sitting right next to his own travel logs, we find this correspondence.
That visualizes the link. It tells the audience these aren't just random emails, they were stored in Epstein's digital briefcase.
Or if there is a document where Epstein is CC'd, you quote that first. Even if it's just a C attached, you quote it to establish his presence.
Right.
And if you don't have that, you have to acknowledge the inference explicitly. Add a line like, while the negotiation eventually went direct, the channel was indisputably opened by Epstein, as evidenced by the file's location.
You have to make him a participant in the narrative flow, not just a clickbait headline.
Exactly.
If you don't close that loop, it feels like two separate stories just stapled together. One about Epstein and one about Barak. And the audience is just going to drift because they're stuck wondering, wait, why are we looking at this?
Okay, so let's move on to the actual meat of the correspondence. The material builds a pretty strong case for a political controversy, but I feel like the writer buried their strongest weapon.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
There is that one specific line in the email, the offer to work through a European company to reduce the Israeli presence.
That line is the absolute pivot point of the entire story. I was reading through the transcript and I almost missed it because of where it was placed.
And that is the problem. Right now, it's read as just, item number 2 in a list of logistical detail. It just flows right past the ear.
Which is just wild, because you have to think about the weight of that sentence. Reduce the Israeli presence. This changes the whole genre of the story.
It does.
It stops being a story about a business deal, even a shady one, and it starts being a story about national identity, about political subterfuge. I mean, this is a former prime minister offering to mask his own country's flag to secure a contract.
It's the difference between I want to sell you software and
I am willing to hide who I am to get the money.
Yes.
But the way it's scripted right now, the listener is still processing the sentence before about dates or the Happy New Year pleasantries, and suddenly you're past the European cover-up before it even registers.
It's a classic case of the writer knowing the material so well that they forget the audience is hearing it for the very first time. They're treating every sentence with equal weight.
So how do we fix the pacing on this? How do we maximize the impact? We have to break the quote reading.
Oh, for sure.
You cannot read a paragraph that dense in one breath and expect the audience to catch all the nuance.
You have to isolate the variable.
Exact. Here's a concrete example of how to restructure that. The narrator should read the email up to the point of participate in the security efforts, and then stop.
A full stop.
Yeah.
A full stop. Let there be a beat of silence.
Create that suspense. Make the audience lean in. Then the narrator has to set up the next line. You don't just read it, you frame it. You say something like, but Barak knew the optics were sensitive, and this was his proposed solution. Then you read the line about
That framing forces the listener to look at it through the lens you want them to. You're telling them, pay attention, this next sentence is the important one.
You could also contrast it specifically with the opening of the email. The Happy New Year to all the Alfani family greeting. That shows this personal warmth. It's diplomatic. It's friendly. The European company offer shows cold political calculation.
That's a great narrative device, putting them side by side with that pause in between. It just highlights the duality of the subject, doesn't it?
Right.
He's the friendly diplomat on one hand and the covert operator on the other.
And if this were a visual medium, you'd pull that text out as a headline. In audio, your voice has to be the highlighter. You have to slow down, reduce, the Israeli present. Make sure that phrase lands before you move on.
It's all about editorial hierarchy. Not all sentences in a source document are created equal. This one is the smoking gun for the subterfuge angle. If you rush it, you kill the story.
Now, let's look at how the script handles the rebuttal. Every investigative piece has to handle the subject's denial fairly, but also critically.
Of course.
The script reads Barak's response, which is, essentially, there never was an agreement or business activity. Then the reporter concludes he didn't continue the deal because he finished his role at Carbine.
That conclusion feels incredibly weak to me. It sounds almost apologetic, or at least purely logistical. It reads as, well, he wanted to do it, but then he got a new job, so it didn't happen.
It lacks any kind of causality when it comes to the intent. The weakness here is that it allows the circumstances, leaving the company, to take the blame for the deal falling through, rather than pinning the intent of the negotiation firmly on the subject.
But isn't it factually accurate? I mean, he did leave Carbine.
It is factually accurate, but it's analytically lazy. The story isn't about whether the deal was signed. The story is about whether a former prime minister was willing to make that deal.
I see. Okay. So by phrasing it as he didn't continue because he left, it makes the whole cancellation sound like a coincidence.
Yes.
It leaves this wiggle room for the listener to think, well, maybe Barak would have realized it was a bad idea and pulled the plug eventually, on ethical grounds.
Exactly. It gives him an unearned ethical out. We need to tighten that causal link. The script has to argue that the intent to deal was fully formed and only these external circumstances stopped it. The mind of the deal was willing, only the body of the corporate structure failed.
Okay, so how do we phrase that without sounding biased? We want to stay objective but be firm about it.
You rely on the timeline. Instead of saying Barak didn't continue because he finished his part, try phrasing it like this. The correspondence shows a willing seller and a willing buyer. The only reason a contract isn't attached is that Barak left Carbine before the ink could hit the paper.
That removes the maybe. It makes it clear that the trajectory was headed straight towards a signature.
And you can bolster this with the Qatari response. The script mentions the Qataris wrote back saying, we would appreciate help with drones.
Right.
That proves the negotiation was active and it was reciprocal.
Right. That directly counters the spirit of the denial. Barak says no business activity of any kind, but negotiation is an activity. Solicitation is an activity.
So the concrete suggestion is to rephrase that closing argument. Move from the subjective, he had no ethical problem, which is an opinion, it sounds judgy, to the objective, the documents prove active solicitation, regardless of the final signature.
That's a verdict the audience can trust because it's based on the timeline, not the reporter's feeling. We know he wanted to do it because he asked to do it and they said, yet the fact that he quit his job the next month doesn't change the intent of that email.
Let's actually drill down deeper into that Qatari response, because this leads to our fourth point, technical specificity.
Okay.
The script mentions drones or technology, katapamim or technologio, very broad. But given that our listener is an expert in this field, and the subject matter is national security, technologies is just way too vanilla.
This is where the script misses a huge opportunity to add real value. The listener knows who Ehud Barak is. They know what the World Cup is, but they might not know the specific mismatch between the company, Carbine, and the request.
So remind us, what does Carbine actually do?
Carbine is a 911 infrastructure company, okay? They build cloud-native emergency response platforms. They help dispatchers see video from callers, locate them precisely. It's defensive, civilian, life-saving tech.
Okay, and what did the Qataris ask for?
Drones and special services.
That seems like a massive disconnect.
It's not just a disconnect, it's a potential escalation. I mean, if I run a company that sells ambulances, and you ask me for a tank, and I keep the conversation going,
Right.
that is a very different story than if you just asked me for more ambulances.
But the script just lumps it all under security for the World Cup.
Exactly. If Carbine sells 911 software and the Qataris say, great, can you get us attack drones or surveillance UAVs? That's a pivot to hard security assets.
So the suggestion here is to briefly define Carbine's actual product suite in the script. You have to contextualize the Qatari request.
You have to. You need to ask, does the request for special services regarding drones match what Carbine sells? If not, pointing that out is a story in itself. It suggests that perhaps the Qatari officials saw Barak not as the chairman of a 911 company, but as a former general who could get them access to Israeli military tech.
And that paints the European company's subterfuge in a much darker light. If you're hiding your identity to sell 911 software, that's one thing, maybe just business politics. If you are hiding your identity to sell surveillance drones to a foreign nation,
that is a much heavier accusation, but we can't make that accusation unless we define the terms for the listener.
So a concrete example would be for the host to add just one sentence. While Carbine specializes in emergency response platforms, 911 tech, note that the Qatari representative Jabor specifically pivots the conversation to drones, a hard security asset.
It sharpens the so what of the entire story. It respects the audience's intelligence by giving them the technical specifications of the deal, not just the headline. It moves the report from look at this scandal to look at the specific nature of this negotiation.
And that specificity is what makes the rebuttal we talked about earlier so much stronger. It's not just that he was negotiating, it's what he was entertaining negotiating.
It really highlights that in these investigative scripts, the devil isn't just in the details. The devil is in the arrangement of the details. You have to stack the blocks in the right order. Epstein leads to the email. The email leads to the specific European quote. The quote reveals the subject. The technical mismatch reveals the danger. And the timeline destroys the denial.
When you lay it out like that, it's a forensic argument.
It is. And that's what the listener wants. They don't want to be told what to think. They want the evidence presented so clearly that they have no choice but to reach the conclusion themselves.
Okay, so let's bring this all together for our listener. We have 4 main actionable takeaways to really refine this script.
First up, the chain of custody. Don't just ask the audience to trust the Epstein headline. Show them the folder. Show them the digital file path.
Right.
If there isn't a direct introduction email, you have to explicitly explain the inference based on where the files were found. Make Epstein a visible participant in that document trail.
Second, the stop and stare technique. That European cover quote is your diamond. Don't bury it in a list of logistics. Stop the narration. Frame the importance of the line. Then read it slowly. Make sure the listener understands that this is the moment the story pivots from business to subterfuge.
Third, sharpen the rebuttal. The current conclusion, it just lets the subject off the hook by blaming the timeline. You need to rephrase it to focus on intent. The deal didn't happen because he left needs to change to the negotiation was active and reciprocal. The departure was just the logistical reason it wasn't signed.
And finally, define the tech. Don't use generic words like technology. Contrast Carbine's civilian 911 portfolio with the Qatari request for drones. That discrepancy adds a whole new layer of depth to the story, and it hints at why the European cover might have been so necessary in the first place.
It's all about precision. Precision in the link, precision in the quote, precision in the argument, and precision in the tech.
We really want to see the script succeed because the core material here is explosive. It just needs that narrative tightening to make sure the explosion happens in the listener's mind, not just on the page.
Absolutely. Take these notes, do a redraft, and please send it back to us. We'd love to see if the argument holds more weight when the evidence is structured this way.
That does it for this critique. Thanks for listening, and keep digging.